I wanted to talk a little bit about um, the there's the ideal physicality of play. The ideal physicality of play would be a table setup like I saw in the video that you just played, the latest video you posted with the circular desk situation. But instead of a donut and a hole in the middle, you would have a lazy Susan.
Hmm.
And, and then of course we would all have fun pens and stuff and, spin it over to me and I'll do it, or I grab it and spin it over and draw it the way I want and stuff like that. And that would be wonderful. But you can't put a lazy Susan in a box. And it's not much different from just sitting around a standard table and just having a piece of paper in the middle.
Hmm.
And I think that maybe the thing to do is to, at the moment, is to stay minimalistic and low tech. And therefore, now the getting up and walking over for the the bags, the draws, the you know what I'm talking about. I can't help but think that was good. I mean, it
Yeah.
really did seem to carry a nice weight in it. You may be familiar with Jared Sorensen's Inspectors, in which the medium of a reality TV show has been adapted into play. So that although a great deal of play is, as you would expect, characters are making their decisions and conducting their actions in real time. Um, at certain points, a player may shout, "Oh God, what was the word for it? That's the perfect word for it. Intermission? It wasn't intermission. It was
Intervention or
no,
no?
no, no. It was what. Anyway, what would happen is that they would jump up off the table and they'd run over to a chair, which of course during play is sitting over there invitingly and threateningly empty the whole time. They run over and sit in the chair, and they start talking as if to an interviewer after the current scene had concluded. And they would say things that were directed or were recommended to be just vague enough to be uh, used, because you're about to play the rest of the scene.
Hmm.
And so what you're basically doing is throwing in some material, and it's kind of like, and that's when my hair caught on fire, and something, and then of course you go back and play, and we all know that at some point his hair is going to have to catch fire. But it often was emotional. The person was enthused, or the person was dejected, or the person was really complaining about Sam, and whatever it is. But the point was that they were speaking as if to an interviewer after, and talking about the experience. And then I'm talking about the physicality, because when I played Inspectors before it was even published, as a book, when we were basically waving around printout sheets, I played with about 6 or 7 people at one point, and we set up that chair, and everybody loved this so much is that when somebody ran over and did the sit down, the rest of the group spontaneously, we just did this, ran up and did one of those sort of huddle crouch audience, like poses, like for a soccer team or something, where everybody else all like this together, facing the person in the chair like an enthusiastic audience.
Hmm.
And that developed spontaneously from the position, from the first phenomenon, the go sit in the chair rule. And it really struck me. It was my first incredible lesson in play space that in this case especially had nothing to do with representational action. You weren't acting out what was happening in play. So it wasn't live action role playing. It was a completely different thing that looted another medium, and also did so in such a fashion that the group elaborated upon it in that case. So that's just a really long-winded way of saying when you find some physicality like you did that for some reason seems to carry a charge.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think
Look
that
at
poster
that.
board.
Yeah,
Yeah.
look at that.
I mean, the poster board does have a practical function of
Mm-hmm.
like being a place for people to put notes. I mean, like they can do drawings and things that will be helpful to them later on. Like if we're having the discussion over what kind of moral universe was this, we have
Yeah,
the
there's a
poster
bunch
board.
of reflective pseudo data, experiential data,
Yeah.
if that's the right word, right, is
Right.
up there.
But I think, yeah, but also, yeah, the use of it just as something that does get people up and it does help with, I think, the rhythm of the game
Mm-hmm.
that I think becomes really important for it. Um, yeah, that element, I was kind of curious because, this was done for Game Chef, and one element you were supposed to incorporate was the sheepskin. And so that, it was somewhat fortuitous as
Mm-hmm.
to how this kind of became, this idea that, oh, we'll have like a sheepskin vellum that we draw on. But yeah, I think, in terms of the way that the game is designed, it's served a really useful role for a number of different
Yeah.
uh, things.
One thing that is tough is that in the last couple of play sessions, you guys didn't really finish it out, right? I mean, and
Right.
but that's where we need to really focus on is the finish. Um, and the interesting question of how many, because you reduced the number of stories or of sequences that you had to conclude. How many is there now? Just 4, 5?
They're now 5.
5. 5 still seems like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And although I'm not saying to pare it down to the bare minimum, whatever that is, a certain richness is a good thing, particularly when you have to decide what kind of moral universe it is. You kind of do want, some richness there. The question is, though, not how little is enough, but rather how much is too much. And so the question becomes, that's where all the observation, I think, needs to go right now is what are the ways that people process deciding what kind of universe it is and conducting the outcomes. And like you found in that one about the alleged proletariat category, whether you actually do have categories that are making sense for people.
Yeah.
One of the biggest dangers is the race to the middle when it comes to choosing what kind of universe it is and also discovering where the characters sit. What I mean by race to the middle is the option that everybody can live with rather than the best option. And that may be a feature, but it's kind of a bummer. I mean, are you always going to end up with a kind of either karmic or relatively quotidian choice? Is anyone ever going to choose a diabolic universe? That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you have a bunch of people, there's a wide variety of dynamics that could lead to always going to sort of the two most, well, for lack of a better word, fair,
Right.
and not too preachy and not too malevolent. It's okay. Anyway, I think I made my point. That's sort of the one thing, but we don't know. We're gonna have to play through and see what that dynamic is actually. And that's actually a bit of why I was joking about the card draw for the universe, not a recommendation, but as a mental device for you to suddenly say, wait a minute, A, would it, quote, work? Would it be just as much fun? And B, what are we getting out of that being a choice? So that's, I mean, we've already got the choice of assigning, the sides. So That's where the observations, I think, need to focus super hard right now.
Yeah.
And because if you really get that the way you want and are confident with the processes in question, then the emergence from the improv and then less improv and more intuitive and driving aspects of play, what emerges from there can be, I think, very powerful and have the philosophic weight that you actually have been seeking.
Correct.
For the game. Without it, you're going to have a drop off. See what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have this drop off, and then we do this thing.
Right. In that end phase, when you're arguing about the moral universe, I feel like there needs to be a sense that decision needs to be connected to what went on in the game.
Absolutely. You can't just have everybody vote for the universe they like.
Right. But then you're running into the issue that you have these different characters at the table, and those characters may have very different ideas while they are playing about what is this moral universe.
Exactly. So if my guy was this total dick who did this and did that and was a big engine for the story, I'm not saying the player was, right? So let's say for the sake of this point, let's say that everybody playing was superb and we really liked playing with each other, and my guy was a dick, and so what's to stop me from plumping for the diabolic universe, for really arguing for it? So you don't want the logic of, I want this kind of universe because then my guy gets, obviously, gets going the right way. That's the dynamic that I am seeking to avoid in this part of the discussion. And again, rather than come up with a design engineering solution to solve that, like abstractly, let's just watch and see what people do at that point. So many games are badly play tested for their final third, as I was talking about with Justin, and this one's vulnerable to that very badly. So that's why playing through again with people you don't have to teach, playing again with the same people, is probably a really good idea, because then they're kind of prepped for the first part of what to do and they're not grappling with it. You can also see whether it's fun when it's not novel, which is very important. There are a number of games out there that are way more fun when you're playing them for the first time than they actually are.
Yeah. Well, I've been, a couple things that I've been pleasantly surprised with. One is at the beginning of our last play test, one of the players, Joe, was asking a question at the beginning, like, well, what if a player doesn't get enough of those karma tokens built up? That has never been an issue. I think we have, in terms of the number of tokens that have to get assigned through each turn, it seems to me like we have a good number there, right? That everybody's accumulating them, and it's giving you enough so that when you decide on the karma universe, everybody has enough of a pool of these different kind of judgments that have been made. And then the other thing that I, at least so far, even those of us who have played the game a number of times, when we sit down, it's still exciting because, it's pretty open-ended as to what the characters are going to become and what the narrative is going to be that develops around the table.
One more of my seeming inexhaustible supply of game drops is Zombie Cinema by Eero Tuovinen, which I think is a superior piece of work. And what you just said reminds me of it, partly because the structural aspect of play is, like waiting rooms, extremely fixed in terms of, okay, this, now that. and it's abstract rather than fictional, just like in waiting rooms. You say, "Oh, we go up a staircase now in the weird space," um, and zombie cinema will have something like, "Okay, the piece has moved to this point on the board, and that means that the characters are sooner or later, imminently, are going to be in a situation that you could describe as a choke point. It is either a choke point of, an ethical choice or physical space or something like that." Um, well, the reason I bring it up is that zombie cinema is an eminently replayable game, which you might not think of if you're talking about, zombie movies, a big fucking deal. But it is, for a number of reasons. And since everybody contributes greatly to the fictional world, you start with a very, very basic set of statements, and input rapidly turns it. I mean, you can the the high tech dystopia with flying cars, and then there's the surreal amusement park, and all these different ways and things that people have played in my presence, and it really does seem to work very well. So there's some clear sorts of human interaction and creativity that can do this. So that's fantastic. Let's take a but that's fine. I mean, you're talking about how much fun it is to watch the world and the history of the characters and stuff take shape. But we're talking about the ending, and that's where that observational replayability becomes much more interesting. I actually think.
Right.